This is Daily Power Parsha, February 12th, 2021. I'm sharing my screen with you. Let me make sure it's the right screen that I'm sharing. And we are ready to roll. Exodus chapter 22, verse number 4, we talk about more situations, more scenarios of liability, damages. If a man leads his animals into a field or vineyard or lets his animal loose and it eats in another's field, the best of his field or the best of his vineyard, he shall pay. So if you have an animal and your animal goes into someone else's yard and eats the roses, do animals eat roses? Did I make that up? Is that in a cartoon? Do animals eat roses? I don't know. Whatever. Then
not the thorns.
Not the thorns. Hopefully not the thorns. Or if your friend has a field and you're taking your animal and your animal starts grazing in that other guy's field, you got to pay. Like you got to pay for whatever was essentially stolen. Next, if fire, let's talk about fire, another category of damage. If fire goes forth and finds thorns in a stack of grain or standing grain or the field be consumed, the one who ignited the fire shall surely pay. This is a very important law, by the way. This establishes liability for fire. One might say, one could argue, I didn't burn down the other guy's house. I just lit this trash can on fire. I don't know what you're talking about. And the Torah says, that's not how it works. If you light a fire and don't contain it and put it out and watch it properly, then you can't tell me, I never destroyed the house. The fire went. Yeah, that's what fire does, bub, right? That's you. That's totally on you. This establishes liability for that. If a man, next, number 6, if a man gives his neighbor money or articles for safekeeping, and it is stolen from the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay twofold, as we said before. If the thief is not found, now, so you give your neighbor, right? It's like, I'm going out of town. Here's my this, take care of it, whatever this is. I'll be back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, you come back. Whoops, the thing is gone. It was stolen in the middle of the night, one night. So if you find the thief, he's got to pay it back twice. If the thief is not found, right? By the way, those that took the Talmud course recently, right, from Rabbi Jacobson, this is the source of those laws. If the thief is not found, the homeowner shall approach the judges to swear that he has not laid his hand upon his neighbor's property. So all the neighbor has to do is say, look, I didn't steal it. It really was stolen. I don't still have it in my house. And then he is off the hook. Are you with me on this? Right? You give your friend something, you come back and the guy claims that it was stolen. Now you don't know what happened because you were gone for 2 weeks. It could be this guy pocketed it. You don't know, but he's claiming theft. So what do? And you can't find the thief. You take him to the court. All he has to do is promise, take an oath that he did not take it, and he's off the hook. No liability. For any sinful word, for a bull, for a donkey, for a lamb, for a garment, for any lost article concerning which he will say that this is it, the pleas of both parties shall come to the judge, and whoever the judge declare guilty shall pay twofold to his neighbor. This is talking about a case where there is suspicion about misappropriation. If a man gives his neighbor a donkey, a bull, a lamb, or any animal for safekeeping, and it dies, breaks a limb, or is captured, and no one sees it, the oath of the Lord shall be between the two of them, provided that he did not lay his hand upon his neighbor's property, and its owner shall accept it, and he shall not pay. So again, the same similar law, that if it was damaged, right, or captured, but there's no evidence, then you cannot attribute automatic liability to the one who was safeguarding it. We don't know that there was negligence. It could have been an accident. Therefore, he's off the hook. But if it is stolen from him, he shall pay its owner. Obviously, this is a contradiction to what we said before, that by theft, the one who's watching is not liable. So here, this is why we need the Talmud. The Talmud explains this is a different case. This is talking about a case where you paid the guy to watch it. The previous case was where you asked for a favor. You asked for a favor, it is what it is. But if you pay someone to watch it, they got to give it back to you. If it's stolen, that's the risk that you take for getting paid to watch something. Are you with me on this? Does that make sense, what I just said? There's a difference if you ask someone to do a favor or if you pay them professionally to watch something. If you pay them professionally, then there's a guarantee that they're going to get it back to you. And if it's stolen, they have to come up with it. If it is If it is a favor, then there's no liability. Now, if it's torn apart, in other words, if an animal came and tore it apart, it's a freak accident. He shall bring witnesses for it. For the torn one, he shall not pay. So you don't have to pay for, an act of God, so to speak. An animal comes in, but theft is negligence. Theft, you have to take more precautions. If a person borrows an animal from his neighbor, now we're talking about borrowing. Not that the guy asks you to safeguard it, but now it's your benefit. You want it, so you're borrowing. And it breaks a limb or dies. If its owner is not with him, he shall shortly pay. So this is an example. Verse 13 is a very practical case. Imagine you're borrowing your neighbor's car. You need a car. You don't have a car. You borrow your neighbor's car, and you're driving it, and suddenly you pop a tire, right? Who's liable? Who's liable? The borrower, right? I mean, it's terrible. What's the word I'm looking for? It's timing. Timing is terrible. But what are you going to do? You borrowed it. It's your deal. If you're driving the car and something goes wrong with the car, whatever, the engine light comes on, it seems like there would also be liability there because, again, you're not doing him a favor. He did you a favor, right? You're the borrower. You get all the benefit. You also have the liability, right? There's a ratio. It works with benefit and liability. The greater the benefit, the greater the liability. The less benefit, the less liability. So if you're doing your neighbor a friend by watching their stuff for free, you have the least benefit, right? What do you get out of it? You get the opportunity to safeguard someone else's stuff for free. That's not a lot of benefit. Therefore, your liability is reduced. But when you're borrowing it, you're getting to use a car for free. That's a lot of benefit. Guess what? You got a lot of liability. Does that make sense? By the way, when you rent a car, it's different because you don't have. It's not you're not getting all the benefit. You're paying for the benefit, so your liability goes down a little bit. Anyway, that's just as an aside. All of these are the points that are elaborated in an entire tractate of Talmud, dozens and dozens of pages. So we're not going to go through all of the details, but I just want to give some semblance of rationale and understanding it. If the owner is with him, he shall not pay. So if you're borrowing a car, but you're with the guy, and there's less liability because he's with you. If it is a hired animal, it is covered with hire. Okay. Here we go. If a man, take a look at this one. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall provide her with a marriage contract as a wife. So here the Torah says, and we have to understand also a little bit of the historical context here, which is very important. And that is that the Torah has an interest to not leave a woman who was seduced by some dude in a vulnerable situation. So if a guy seduces her, so the Torah says, then you should marry her. In other words, if you were with her, right, in this kind of sneaky way, then ideally marry her, because otherwise maybe she will be looked at as, again, this is more of an ancient societal perspective. If there's any chance that she would be looked at by anyone else in a negative way for having been with this other guy, so then it's the responsibility of this guy to marry her and not just like get rid of her, right? God forbid. But if her father refuses to give her to him in marriage, or let's say the family doesn't want, then he shall weigh out money according to dowry of the virgins. Then in other words, at this point, he's got to somehow compensate for the ketubah that might be different in this scenario. Next, verse 17. You shall not allow a sorceress to live. It's also a sorcerer. It's not gender specific. It just uses, and Rashi explains, and generally there were more women sorcerers than male sorcerers. I don't know why. It is what it is. The Torah is using the more frequent example, but in general, the idea of sorcery is touches on idolatry, which is a capital crime. Whoever lies carnally with an animal shall surely be put to death. So I'm not going to give too much commentary on that, but that would be, I guess, a capital crime in Torah. He who slaughters a sacrifice to the gods shall be destroyed except to the Lord alone. In other words, we're only allowed to offer and to worship Hashem and to offer sacrifices to God. You shall not mistreat a stranger, nor shall you oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. What a verse. What a verse. What a powerful verse. Again, a lot of the verses that we read, just a translation, can be misconstrued. We had some of those before. about the man who seduces the virgin. There's not enough time to get into each verse and elaborate on it for 10 minutes because we're going to run out of time. I want to get through more material than less. But every single law in Torah is really about sensitivity, even if it doesn't look like that at first glance. There's a way to understand it from a sensitive perspective. And here's one of those verses that you don't need commentary because it's clear. You're not allowed to mistreat a stranger, right? Someone who's not Jewish, someone who's a visitor, someone who's a foreigner to the land, you're not allowed to mistreat them. You're not allowed to oppress them. Don't you remember how it was in Egypt? Don't you remember what happened to you in Egypt? Don't do that to someone else. You were the stranger and you were mistreated and oppressed. Don't do that to the other. Next, this is one of those verses that is repeated multiple times in Torah. You shall not oppress any widow or orphan. If you oppress him, any of these vulnerable individuals, the stranger, the widow, the orphan, beware. For if he cries out to me, I will surely hear his cry. My wrath will be kindled, and I will slay you with the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children orphans. Okay, all right, some scare tactics here, certainly, but the point is, God says, you gotta be there for the vulnerable. Do not cast someone to the curb or step on them because they're down. That is not the way. God says, if you do that, it ain't gonna be good. Let's just leave it more as a general, warning. When you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, you shall not behave toward him as a lender. I love that. When you lend, don't be a lender. What does that mean? You shall not impose interest upon him. This becomes the Torah prohibition to charge interest on a loan. And yes, if you're wondering, is that a thing? That is a thing. According to Torah, you cannot lend money with interest. I know the banks do it and whatever, but when you give somebody who needs money to the poor person, don't harm them by lending with interest. If you take your neighbor's garment as security, here's another sensitive law. Let's say you give a loan and they give as a security collateral, they give a garment. If you take your neighbor's garment until sunset, you shall return it to him. For it is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. With what shall he lie? And it'll be that if he cries out to me, I will hear because I am gracious. In other words, this guy gives you the garment as a security, and the Torah says, give it back. What kind of security is that, right? If you have to give it back, the Torah says, who cares about security? Who cares about your loan? This guy doesn't have something to wear. He needs the garment. Give him back as collateral. Do you understand what's going on here? A collateral is the only guarantee, and the Torah says, so what? It's money. The guy doesn't have clothing. Give him back his clothing. Obviously, if he has other clothing, then this law wouldn't apply. It applies if he's so needy that he doesn't have any other clothing. Does that make sense? It's got to make sense because I've already clicked the button for reading number 4. Here
Rabbi,
we go. Yes,
Rabbi,
Donna, go ahead.
Macbeth and Shakespeare and Pound of Flesh. I mean,
Yes.
How did that all come about if that's completely contrary to?
So first of all, the idea of demanding a pound of flesh is no one would ever do that. It's against, I can't say what people would do. People would do anything, but it's totally against Jewish law. But your question is, can a Jewish person be a money lender with interest? The answer is yes, provided it is not a loan to a member of the tribe. The Torah specifies when you lend money to your people, in other words, amongst your community, don't charge interest. There's no prohibition against charging interest to someone who's not Jewish. Now, does that mean that you have to? No, but the prohibition is not there. Now, if you're wondering, isn't this imbalanced? Isn't that not nice? Isn't it? So you have to start with the premise that charging interest is normal. It's a normal thing that if I'm parting with my money, what am I getting out of it if I don't get some interest from it at the end of the day? So that's normal. The Torah is asking us to act not normal, but the Torah doesn't set the bar so high to make it impossible. The Torah says amongst your community, don't do this because it's your neighbor, you're harming your neighbor. But a larger business deal, a larger situation, again, the prohibition does not apply. So that's the difference. In some of those societies that the story of the Merchant of Venice was mentioned. So there were areas, geographical regions and countries where Jews were not allowed to have any other job, or were not allowed to have many jobs. And one of the only areas of work that they could find was in the money lending business. for some reason, it was one of the only jobs that was allowed for Jews. I think it was considered to be a dirty business, so it was allowed for Jews to do it, and then Jews who charge interest were considered to be were vilified for that, even though that was the only way they could make a living. So that's where that came from. But yeah, it's ironic because Torah literally says we shouldn't do it, and there is a prohibition against a fellow Jew, but the prohibition doesn't exist there for others. And unfortunately, or whatever it was, due to context, that's the job that many had and became associated with that. And I will tell you, I think even till today, there's an association of money and dirty money, etc., as a stereotype, and it is what it is. I don't know, stereotypes are hard to kick, but what are you going to do? All right, let's continue reading number 4. You shall not curse a judge, neither shall you curse a prince among your people. Your fullness offering and your heave offering you shall not delay. All right, don't delay your heave offering, in case you were thinking about pushing that off. The firstborn of your sons you shall give me. Not literally, but we talked before about redemption of the firstborn, etc. So shall you do with your cattle, with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. The 8th day you may give it to me as an offering. That's for the firstborn. And you shall be holy people to me, and flesh torn in the field you shall not eat. You shall throw it to the dogs. In other words, food, specifically meat, should be kosher. And part of kosher is not just the animal's kosher, but that it's slaughtered in a kosher way. If the animal is not slaughtered, but rather, killed in the field by another animal, it's not kosher. Even if it's a cow, it wasn't shechted, it wasn't slaughtered. So what should you do with it? You shall throw it to the dogs. Why the dogs? As a reward. Why a reward? Because it says at the time of the Exodus, the dogs didn't bark by the 10th plague, by the death of the firstborn, because they didn't. We read that in Torah. It says, Torah says, if you recall a few weeks ago, that even the dogs didn't bark. And so as a reward for keeping the noise down, so we give this non-kosher meat, we give it to our animals and to the dogs as a reward. All right. What if you don't have a dog and have a cat? I don't know. It's a good question. I guess give the cat food. And I don't know if cats eat meat. Do cats eat meat? Cats would eat meat? Yes?
My cat's on a restricted diet. I have to get him food with a prescription from the veterinarian.
Sharna, what do you have?
Cats have to eat meat.
Okay.
They are meat eaters.
Got it. There you go. All right. So there you go. So maybe the dogs and the cats, but dogs specifically mentioned. The point is, don't eat it, but give it to use it for something useful. And dogs specifically mentioned as a reward for not barking. Let's continue. This is regarding the laws of judges and courts. You shall not accept a false report. Okay, that makes sense, right? Don't accept false testimony. If you're a judge and a court, do not place your hand with a wicked person to be a false witness, right? Don't join in to be a false witness either. Don't give false testimony. So don't accept false testimony and don't give false testimony. If you're a judge, you shall not follow the majority for evil, and you shall not respond concerning a lawsuit to follow many to pervert justice. Neither shall you glorify a poor man in his lawsuit. In other words, just because he's poor doesn't mean that he's right. The point is that justice should not be swayed either way, to the many, to the mob. When I say mob, I don't mean literally like the mafia. I mean to like the masses who are demanding something. Just because they're demanding doesn't mean that it's right necessarily. And just because the person is downtrodden doesn't mean that they're right. Justice is justice. Right is right. I hope that makes sense, right? In other words, judges could be swayed either by power, money, and influence, or out of a sense of compassion to the underdog. And both of those are illegitimate ways to run a court. Both of those are not legitimate ways to serve justice. You got to listen to the facts and adjudicate like that. And Hashem will take care of the rest. You got to do what the right thing is vis-a-vis the facts on the ground. If you come upon your enemy's bull or his stray donkey, it's your enemy, but it's gone stray. It's wandering, right? You shall surely return it to him. This becomes the mitzvah of returning lost items, even if it's your enemy. Now, if it's your friends, you might say, yeah, of course. That's Yankel's sheep. Let me get it back to him. But what if it's Shmerel's sheep? Shmerel and you haven't talked for years. You don't like Shmerel so much. But his animal is wandering, is lost. Do the right thing. Do the right thing. Return it. And by the way, return it is not so simple. It means you have to catch it and collect it and feed it and find this person. And if you can't find them, you have to take care of the animal. Oh, it's not so easy. It's a schlep. You can't look the other way and pretend you don't see it. If you see, now another case, if you see your enemy's donkey lying under its burden, in other words, it was loaded up too much and it's now like crouching, it's buckling under its weight. Would you refrain from helping him? No way. You shall surely help along with him. In other words, even though it's your enemy's donkey, and you might say, my enemy's donkey is my enemy, or something like that. Like, I don't care about this animal. No, you have to have compassion on the animal, right? Even if you don't like the guy, the animal is suffering. Alleviate the burden of the animal. I hope the sensitivity of Torah law is coming through in these cases. Okay, and again, even if it sounds weird sometimes, some of the laws, and I don't explain it, just all we need to do is look at it a little bit in the commentaries and we'll find what it means. Next, you shall not pervert the judgment of your poor man in his lawsuit. Once again, don't pervert justice of the poor man. And that could be either way. Like literally that could mean either way. Either, oh, who cares if he loses anyway, you know, he's, God forbid, we don't care too much about this person. Or I feel bad for this person, I'm going to make them win even though they don't deserve it. Either way, it would be perversion of justice. You have to go with what is right, what the facts on the ground are. Next, distance yourself from a false matter. That means no lying. That's a general rule against deception. Midvar sheker tirchak, distance yourself from falsehood. That means not only don't tell a lie, but also don't withhold the truth. Because withholding truth is also something that is deceptive. And do not kill a truly innocent person or one who has been declared innocent, for I will not vindicate a guilty person. So don't provide capital punishment for one who is not indeed guilty. You shall not accept a bribe. Again, if you're a judge, do not accept a bribe. For a bribe will blind the clear-sighted and corrupt words that are right, which means that even if you think you're looking at things clearly, and even if you think that your words are right, if you've accepted a bribe, they will be blinded and corrupted. That's what the Torah is saying. Even if you think, no, I just took some money, but I'm still going to act objectively. In other words, you're taking the bribe because you want the money, but you're telling yourself, I took the bribe, but who cares? There's no guarantee. I'm still going to be objective. The Torah is saying you will not be able to be objective. Even if you think you're objective, you'll have skin in the game and you won't be able to be objective. You'll have some sort of netiya, some sort of leaning toward that place. And by the way, the Talmud gives examples, gives cases where rabbis, I think the word is recused. Is that the right word? Recuse themselves of a case. Rabbis who were judges on the Bet Din actually said, you know what, I can't take this case because of some sort of favor, benefit, you know, whatever that one of the parties in that case did for them. There's an example of trying to remember, like subtle, not actually monetary bribes, but even compliments. Like somebody complimented the rabbi and it turns out that this guy was going to be the judge on his case. The rabbi said, that's it, I can't. There's another story where a fellow helped out a rabbi, did him a favor, and then later on, the man came before him in a case. Oh, I'm sorry. And he took himself off the case. And then he was listening into the case and he found himself thinking of justifications for that guy. And he said to himself, see, I'm glad I'm not on this case, because his mind subconsciously was finding justifications for that guy's side because of the favor that he had done for him. All right. Next, verse 9, you shall not oppress a stranger. Once again, for you know the feelings of a stranger. You were strange since you were strange in the land of Egypt. All right, fine. Next, 6 years you may sow your land and gather in its produce. This is now the sabbatical year law. But in the 7th year, you shall release it, Shemitah, and abandon it. The poor of your people shall eat from it. What they leave over, the beasts of the field shall eat. So shall you do to your vineyard and to your olive trees grove. 6 days you may. Okay, so that's the sabbatical year, which means that essentially in the 7th year, you do not own your field any more than anyone else. Everyone can have food from it. It belongs to everybody. 6 days, this is now Shabbat. You may do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, in order that your ox and donkey shall also rest, and your maidservant's son and the stranger shall be refreshed. A day off. By the way, this also relates to Egypt, right? Said before, you know what it was like being in Egypt. You know what it's like to work without any break. That's no fun. And so Hashem, in addition to testifying, Shabbat being a testimony to the way God created the world, it also is a testimony to the value of rest and the opposite of enslavement. Enslavement means you got to work 24/7, essentially. And Shabbat is, once we're out of Egypt, never again. Never again will we slaves to the work. We do work, but we're not slaves to it. And we declare that by taking off a day every week, which is Shabbat. That's, again, not the only reason for Shabbat. There's, of course, the spiritual reason, mystical reason, but that's a very human reason, so that everyone is refreshed and not enslaved to the work. Many have argued that having smart devices, which is convenient on the one hand, also keeps us tethered to the work, so that the modern worker is really working 24 hours a day, even at night, fielding emails and text messages of work, as opposed to back in the day, you were in the office after you came home, that was it. Work was done until the next day. So everything has a mila and a chesar, and an advantage and a disadvantage. And one thing is clear, that human beings need a break. We need to unplug. All right, let's continue. Concerning all that I have said to you, shall beware. In other words, take it to heart. In the name of the gods of others, you shall not mention, no idolatry. It shall not be heard through your mouth. 3 times a year, you shall slaughter sacrifices to me. That means not communal sacrifices, but individuals should bring their holiday offerings for the 3 festivals. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread. What is that called? Passover, right? The festival of unleavened bread, Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzah, which is Passover. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I have commanded you, at the appointed time of the month of springtime, which is why Passover is always in the spring. For then you left Egypt, and they shall not appear before me empty-handed. If you make pilgrimage to Israel, to Jerusalem, temple, you shall come with an offering. And the festival of the harvest, Shavuot, the first fruits of your labors, which you will sow in the field, and the festival of the ingathering at the departure of the year. Oh, that's the third one. So harvest festival is Shavuot, which is 7 weeks after Passover. And then the third is the festival of the ingathering, when you bring in the harvest. That's Sukkot, at the departure of the year, when you gather in the products of your labors from their field. So those 3 occasions, 3 times. Again, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, 3 times during the year, all your males shall appear before the master, the Lord. It's an obligation for the men folk, to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the temple. The idea is that, of course, women and children also are invited, but men are obligated to show up at some point during the festival to bring an offering on behalf of themselves and their family members. That is the obligation. 3 holidays. That's why they're called the pilgrimage festivals. You may have heard these 3 holidays being called the pilgrimage festivals. Why pilgrimage? Because they were the times that the men were required to make a pilgrimage to the temple. You shall not sacrifice the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, and the fat of my festive sacrifice shall not stay overnight until morning. Details.
All right, I think.
One more verse. Okay. The choicest of your first fruits of your soil shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. That means the bikurim, the first fruits, you shall bring as a gift to God. And unrelated, but another important mitzvah, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. That is the prohibition against meat and milk. All right, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, about Shavuos.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it called a harvest festival, when in fact it marks the point at which we got the Torah, that got the 10 Commandments?
Yeah, we're referring to the 3 holidays, not based on their historical context, but based on their agricultural context. So if you notice that Passover is referred to as the festival of the unleavened bread, which is not about Exodus, it's about the food, and it's referred to as the springtime holiday. So it's, again, seasonal and cuisinical, which is not a word. It's about the cuisine and about the time of year. And then you have the Shavuot is the harvest festival, again, about food and agriculture. And then Sukkot is also ingathering of the food, which is also about that. Why? It's reflecting another dimension of the holidays. Yes, Passover is the Exodus, Shavuot is the giving of the Torah, and Sukkot is divine protection throughout the desert, yes, each one has another symbolism, but this is another angle on it. The commentaries explain, of course, deeper meanings of these various points of agriculture and the harvest cycle, but there's something also about nature and the cycles of nature that's also connected with the holidays, which is an important theme. And by the way, in Torah studies over the years, even I think recently, we often talk about these types of connections as well. All right, let's jump into the sixth reading. Behold, God says, I am sending an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Beware of him and obey him. Do not rebel against him, him being, I think, the angel, for he will not forgive your transgression, for my name is within him. For if you hearken to his voice and do all that I say, I will hate your enemies and oppress your adversaries. Basically, God is saying, I'm giving you a guardian angel, which I don't know exactly. Can I tell you exactly what that looked like, what that was like, and how the angel have the voice? I don't know. I guess you could understand it either more literally or less literally. Either way, God is saying, I'm protecting you and I'm giving you, a special guardian angel, but you got to listen. You got to follow orders and make sure you're doing what you need to be doing. For my angel, verse 23, will go before you to bring you to the Amorites. This is about the land of Israel that was then occupied by other nations. My angel will go before you, bring you to the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will destroy them. You shall not prostrate yourselves before their gods. You shall not worship them. You shall not follow their practices. You shall tear them down, the monuments and the gods. And you shall utterly shatter the gods, and you shall utterly shatter their monuments. In other words, when you get into Israel and conquer the land, and what's left behind are all these temples and houses of worship and idols, destroy them, knock them down, don't worship them. You shall not prostrate yourself before their gods, and you shall not worship them, and you shall not follow their practices, but rather you shall tear them down, and you shall utterly shatter their monuments. Get rid of the idolatry and the symbols. Rather, you shall worship the Lord your God. And when you do so, he will bless your food and your drink, and I will remove illness from your midst. There will be no bereaved or barren woman in your land. I will fill the number of your days. I will send my fear before you into the other nations, and I will confuse all the people among whom you shall come. I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you as they run away from you. I will send a tzira, which is some sort of illness or affliction before you, in other words, against the enemy, and it will drive out the Hivites, Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them away from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field outnumber you. Rather, I will drive them out from before you little by little until you have increased and can occupy the land. God is saying, when you enter the land of Israel, I'm not going to clear out the land, because then until you settle the whole land, by that time, it's going to be overrun by wild animals. If people aren't around, the animals are going to take over the cities, and it could be wild and dangerous when you get there. Therefore, as you continue your march into Israel, slowly but surely, I will drive out the other peoples. So there's a transition from one nation to another. By the way, I know all of this is very legalistic, right? Lots of laws, and where's the Kabbalah, where's the spirit? So I'll give you a little bit of spiritual stuff right here. The idea that when it comes to our own self-improvement, our own inner landscape, it says about the land of Israel that there were 7 nations that were driven out. In our hearts, there are 7 attributes: love, severity, chesed, gvur, tiferet, 7 attributes, emotional attributes that could be turned toward negativity. The goal is to drive them out, to convert them from the negative expression of love, negative expression of distance, to a positive form, to transform from Canaan to the Holy Land, to Israel. That's the transformation. And the Torah is telling us the transformation doesn't happen all at once, in 1 year, at one time. It happens slowly, one trait at a time. Little by little, we work on our inner landscape to become more menshi. We're not going to become perfect overnight. It's a process that happens, as verse 30 says, little by little. And I will make your boundary in Israel, getting back to the literal meaning, from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the river, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hands, and you shall drive them out from before you. By the way, this is a messianic prophecy because those borders, as described here for Israel, never happened. Never in history was Israel that big. When will that happen? When Mashiach comes, those borders will be expanded. So this promise of how large the borders will be of Israel was never established. So this verse becomes one that will be fulfilled in the future time. Therefore, it is a messianic prophecy. If somebody asks, how do you know about Mashiach in the Torah? Again, it doesn't say clearly, but this is a promise of the Torah that was never manifest, but that will be manifest based on the prophecies when Mashiach comes. Let's continue. You shall not form a covenant for them or for their gods. In other words, don't allow idol worship to continue by saying, okay, listen, you do your thing, we'll do our thing. No, they shall not dwell in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me, that you worship their gods, which be a snare for you. It's going to be a trap if they remain with their temples and idols amongst you. It's going to end up in disaster. By the way, this does not mean that no one was allowed to stay. If somebody wanted to stay and get rid of the idols, they were allowed to stay. But they couldn't remain with their idols. That's what Torah says. That's what Hashem said. It's going to be too much of a trap, too much of a danger if you have people amongst you who are serving idols, which ended up happening and which ended up being a disaster. But this is what the request was for it to happen. Next, let's continue. And Moses said to Moses he said, a lot of stuff here. Okay, 12:45. I think we can make a blitz to the end. I think we can do it. We're going to go through it very quickly. Exodus chapter 24, verse 1. This now chronologically skips back. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. This goes back in time before Sinai. We read about Sinai the giving of the Torah at Sinai last week. This is now going back to the preparation days, the days of preparation before the Torah was given at Sinai. You might wonder, why is it here and not last week? The commentaries discuss it. There are many different ideas and answers and perspectives on it, but this is the way it is. This is what happened before. This is filling in information that happened prior to Sinai. And to Moses, God said, come up to the Lord, right? This sounds familiar. Come up the mountain to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, the 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar. And Moses alone shall approach the Lord, but they shall not approach, and the people shall not ascend with him. Again, this is talking about in preparation for Sinai and climbing the mountain, as we discussed last week. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and the people answered in unison and said, in response to God's offer of the Torah, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Yes, we'll take the Torah, and whatever it says, we'll do. You don't even have to tell us what it says. That's it. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, Mount Sinai, and 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent, basically we're filling in information that wasn't told last week. And he sent the youths of the children of Israel, and they offered up burnt offerings, and they slaughtered peace offerings to the Lord, bulls. This is in preparation for the revelation. And Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and half the blood he cast into the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read it within the hearings of the people. And they said, that the Lord spoke, we will do, and we will hear. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has formed with you concerning these words. And Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, the 70 of the elders of Israel, ascended the mountain. And they perceived the God of Israel, and beneath his feet, God's feet, was like the forming, not literally feet, but beneath God was like the forming of a sapphire brick, sapphire again, and like the appearance of the heavens for clarity. It was like clear crystal and sapphire. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand, and they perceived God, and they ate and drank. And the Lord said to Moses, come up to me to the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets, the law and the commandments which I have written to instruct them. So Moses and Joshua, his servant, arose, and Moses ascended to the mount of God. You know, we've spoken about in many classes about when Moses goes up the mountain after divine revelation, goes up, spends 40 days and 40 nights and receives the tablets, and then comes down and sees the golden calf and then shatters them. Here it is in Torah when Moses goes up the mountain. And to the elders he said, before going up, wait for us here until we return to you. And here Aaron and Hur with you. Whoever has a case, let them go to them. Well, we know the people did go to Aaron, and then they made the golden calf. But Moses basically said, I'm going to go up the mountain, get the tablets. I'll be back. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And Moses went up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. And the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And he called to Moses on the seventh day from within the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire atop the mountain before the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses came within the cloud, and he went up to the mountain. And Moses was upon the mountain for how long? 40 days and 40 nights. If you ever wonder, where did the rabbi get this idea that Moses went up on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights? They got the tablets. The rabbi didn't make it up. The Torah says it. It's all right here. Again, you would never look here. Why would you look at the end of Mishpatim to find this detail? You would look like last week's Torah portion to find out the details what happened before and after Sinai. But you know what? You won't find those details there. You'll find them after all of these civil laws that are stated. After all that, we then go back to fill in more information that we left out in the prior storytelling. Let's continue with seventh reading, which is going to continue the story. And on the seventh day, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
We're done.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. That's the Torah portion. Ta-da! We did it. That was it. The seventh reading this week is Rosh Chodesh reading. We're not going to do the Rosh Chodesh reading because we're doing daily power parashas, the parsha. We add on as a seventh reading, a reading about Rosh Chodesh. Right? The seventh reading, if you look carefully, comes from the book of Numbers. You see that? I just highlighted it there. We read a different section of Torah. We pull out two Torahs tomorrow. One Exodus, one open to the place of the Parsha, and one that's already pre-scrolled to the second reading to the book of Numbers. Now, you could use the same scroll, but then you would have the congregation have to wait while you're scrolling, and it's not nice. So that's why we have two Torahs that are ready to go in their respective spots. So, all right, so let's go back to 6 and maybe give some flair over here because we have a minute or two. Why not? All right, this is cool. All right, that was the end of Mishpatim. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is, what is the bottom line? How did we end? That Moses went up the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. The cloud. I saw a funny meme today. It said there is no such thing as the cloud. Everyone's like, oh, it's in the cloud. Like computing. There's no such thing as a cloud. It's just someone else's computer, right? I mean, that's literally what the cloud is. It's literally data that's on someone else's computer or many computers that are, backed up and replicated, but that are being accessed instantaneously. Anyway, that's the funny thing about the cloud. But I think it's kind of cool, this description about the sapphire and the appearance of the heavens for clarity, which is like this idea of like a crystal almost, a beautiful theme of what was going on. And of course, you know what, I'll probably just end with this message. We saw twice in this reading where the Jewish people declare everything that God says we will do and we will hear. That's one time. And the other time is when the people said, hold on, where is it? Maybe that was the second time. Yeah, that's the second time. The first time is right here. All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. People said, Nasa. People said, Nasa v'nishma. Those two verses, 3 and 7, talk about the absolute unwavering commitment of the Jewish people. The people said, we are in, and that's it. Doesn't matter what the details are, we are committed. And this is one of the great merits of the people at that time, of what they did, and when they accepted the Torah, is that they didn't make it conditional. They didn't say, well, tell me what you're offering and I'll tell you if I'm in. Somebody says, can you do me a favor? And you say, well, what's the favor? But before I commit, tell me what you want. And then I'll tell you if I'm going to do it or not. The people didn't say that. The people said, God, whatever you want, we'll do. We're ready to go. We're ready for you to lead us where you want to go. We have faith. Even the essential, basic following God and Moses in the desert, a place that is not sustainable for human life, there's no way to survive in a desert. I know today you can probably rent an Airbnb in a desert and have an experience. That's today. In ancient times, you go out to the desert, you're going to die. There's no, after a certain amount of time, if you stay in the desert, you will die. You can't survive in a desert. It's not a place where you can live, where human beings live. You run out of water, you run out of food, and you're done. You have a people of 2 million strong, a nation of 2 million that go into a desert and throw caution to the wind. That is incredible loyalty. That's incredible faith. That's very brave, and that's very bold. And it teaches us the power of surrender. Following God into the desert, which is unsustainable for life. Following God's offer for Torah, saying, God, we're following you, whatever you want, nasa v'nishma. We'll do it, and then let us know what it is, right? That surrender is so powerful. Yes, there is value in study, and value in knowing, and value in analyzing, and we study Torah, and we're meant to have a rigorous study of Torah and understand exactly what and why and what it means, and we study Kabbalah, which tells us the deeper meaning of it so that we can appreciate it. All of that is true, but there's something also special about surrender. There's something also special about suspending my need to know, right? Do I really need to know always? Do I really need to understand? Sometimes it's healthy to say, I don't know. And this takes us back to the beginning of our Torah portion, Mishpatim, and the first insight that I share with you at the beginning of the week on Monday. And that is this Torah portion, Mishpatim, which primarily contains civil law, logical civil law about being a mensch and treating others nicely. And, you know, if you damage something, you got to pay for it, right? Basic laws of humanity. The fact that this is the first portion right after Sinai tells us that when we follow a logical law, it should also be with a little bit of that surrender, a little bit of that, you know what? It's a higher calling also. I'm not just doing it because I understand it. I'm doing it because this is the way God wants me to live. God wants me to live like this. I'm going to live like this. Not because I choose that I understand that this makes sense to me, because then I can unchoose it. But rather I surrender to a higher will. I surrender to a higher guide that guides my life, as the Jews did following God into the desert, as the Jews did in preparation for Sinai when they said at the end of the Torah portion, we're ready to go. Whatever it is, if it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense, if it makes sense, great. If it's about not wearing Uggs because of wool and linen, all right, that's it. I'm surrendering. It's a callback for those that were here at the beginning of the week with our Uggs discussion. All right. Yeah, Mark, go ahead. For sure.
Along that very same line, I've never seen this before. At the very end of the Parsha, it says, Moses ascended the mountain and the cloud covered the mountain. And it said, and Moses came in the midst of the cloud and ascended the mountain anyway. In Rashi, it says, in the midst of the cloud means the cloud is a kind of smoke. This is Rashi, what he actually says. The Holy One, blessed is he, made a path for Moses inside it. And a note I have says, just as in the case of the Sea of Reeds, God made a path in the sea, so too here. He made a path for Moses in the cloud.
Love it.
Now, so those are interesting. What I was saying was, it's almost like with Mishpatim, we have divinely given laws. And that is just like the cloud, which was divinely given. And the path, which was a clear path that God created, was what Moses followed to see the glory of God. And just as you were saying, that with all of the laws and all that which we study, sometimes we need to surrender. In other words, I'm saying that's the path. That's what it seems like a metaphor. That's all.
I like it. I like the metaphor. We have this cloud. Maybe even the path is when we're able to get on board with it and we're able to see why it is and what it is and understand it. But I think the bigger point here is that it's not limited to what we see. It's opened up to a greater experience of what we're willing to let go for. And it's, yeah, I like the imagery. I like the imagery, and I like that parallel, like the splitting of the sea, the splitting of the cloud. It's good stuff. Good stuff. You know what that is? It's when the cloud, it's when the server, it's when AWS suddenly there's like the shells fall down in the middle and a path is cleared. I'm kidding. That might be how the cloud parts, but I digress. All right, that is it for Mishpatim. Yeah, so even the Mishpatim, we should do like chukim, surrender. And even the chukim that are the surrender laws that don't make sense, we should study also and try to find some spiritual, at least spiritual significance. We're really meant to have the best of both worlds. Study and appreciate, but also surrender, because there's value in that as well. All right, I hope that makes sense. Ray, Donna, Charna, Mark, and Sandrine, I want to wish you a very joyous Adar, a very joyous Friday, a joyous Rosh Chodesh, a joyous month. I think I said that maybe twice, and a joyous Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, Muvarach.
Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, wow. Look at that challah. Look at
Beautiful.
that
They're
dough.
infused with the daily parasha. So
Nice.
they're going to be better.
Nice. Nice.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing that. That looks delicious, which reminds me, I got to get on my Shabbos food myself.
Yes.
So good Shabbos, everybody. Lots of blessings.
Shabbos.
Don't forget, Sunday morning, we are on Kabbalah and Coffee, please God willing, and the week rolls on. If you haven't yet signed up for your Sapphire and Crystal, for the Gemstone class coming up, do so. Tell your friends and your family to do so. We got that coming up, pre-Purim Adventure, February 22nd, and pre-Passover, March 22nd. And stay tuned for more details about other events. And just basically go on the website and just get one of each for everything. All right. We'll see you all. Take care. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.